Ashes, ashes, we all fall down.
Incident report of Edward Baxter, filed October 16th, forwarded to the email address of Dr Natalia Jennings. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. Drips and drops, the sounds of a minute thunderstorm, each echoing like the booming claps of thunder in the cold, dank gloom of the old brick tunnels. The low, rhythmic rumblings of the world above shook the decaying ceiling, bits of debris raining down, showering my head and shoulders in the small flakes of dry, crumbling plaster and cement. I'd muttered to myself a half-interested bewilderment at how the thing hadn't caved in on its own decrepit self, bringing the outside world pouring down into this ominous abyss. Rubbing the grit from my eyes, my thumb finding the switch of my flashlight in the process. Like a hot knife piercing butter, the beam stabbed through the darkness, scattering the gloom around it. Taking stock of the path that lay ahead and inhaling deeply, like it could well be my last breath of this life, I stepped out into the murky confines of the passageway that lay before me. As the darkness began to creep back in around, I made one final radio check before the gaping mouth of the tunnel began to grow smaller and smaller with each step forward. Still being relatively new to all this, and feeling like a dirty rat in some kind of twisted maze, half blind with only the vaguest of knowledge as to where the cheese was at. The fuses and the breakers were, as far as I could remember, still one floor below me, and, as one of the newer electrical engineers of the London Underground, a vocation I'd sometimes regretted, and a thought that was currently seeping its way into my mind at this time, I was one of the unlucky few that got to service and repair the miles upon miles of electrical cablings, wires, lights, switches. You name it. If a current flowed through it, it had my name carved crudely into it. Far off, out of my current view, was a set of cornered-off metal stairs. They sat lurking beyond the veil of darkness, a darkness my light had yet to fight back. Though, with every shaky step, the blackness would hang back, momentarily behind me, like a stalking predator, sneaking, creeping, biding its time to strike. Blocked up, sealed off, built upon, or just plain forgotten about, was the only way one could aptly describe the subterranean realm of the London Underground, a whole labyrinth right beneath the hustle and bustle of the world above. Every step taken, every pebble kicked would trigger another more large noise, like the cascading sound of rolling cannon fire ricocheting off the walls around me, making my body flinch with each shot fired. Reaching the opposite end, the light of my torch bouncing off the dull metal steps, signalling the first stage of my journey was about to end, and the descent into the abyss was about to begin. Clang, clang, clang. My footfalls loud in my own ears. The circular set of descending steps lay confined in a dark section, akin to an old smokestack, narrow, cylindrical, and very, very claustrophobic. The fact the circuit breakers still lay subsumed in this crumbling pit of despair was just another desperate example of the pitiful cutbacks, woeful lack of money, and the whole, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. Except, it was broke. Or, to be more exact, kept breaking. In the last several weeks alone, fuses in electrical systems had been repeatedly shorting out, but it was here in this section that the situation was happening with alarming frequency, without a clear-cut indication as to what was causing the problems. Of course, this couldn't be ignored. Well, not entirely, due mostly to the impact it was having on the surrounding underground rail lines. Yet, in a poor display, and I might add, completely typical fashion of penny-pinching madness, as long as the fuses could be reset and the system restored, the higher-ups were loath to shut down the local stations. Jumping the final 2 steps as a 5-year-old child would, in an act to impress a parent holding their hand with their show of bravery. Likewise myself, desperately trying to find reassurance in this desolate place. It was like trying to wake the proverbial dead. Impossible. That, and the fact there was no one here to hold my hand. Landing lightly, my footfalls boomed out around me. Of course, I wasn't ignorant of the stories told about this subterranean world, shocking tales of death, plagues, and disappearances. Despite these campfire tales, and this being only my second solo adventure into this pit, I had enough resolve in my conclusion that they were just that. Stories. Yes, this place was beyond eerie. It was cramped, confined, cold and dark. the taste of stale air harsh on the back of the throat, leaving a dry, unpleasant taste in the mouth. You might think the ghostly echoes of the world above, or the sudden rumbling thunder of speeding trains hidden behind meter-thick walls of crumbling red brick were the worst. But actually, they weren't. It was the dead silence in between. When everything went deathly quiet for the barest of minutes that seemed like a lifetime or more, as if the whole of the underground was holding its breath in anticipation. Anticipation for what, you might ask? That I was yet to discover, though rationality dictated I probably never would. Still, it was enough to get the primal instincts to kick in, those fight-or-flight reflexes, the rising dread that couldn't be stemmed, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end and the inexplainable chill, as if an icy, ethereal hand had just reached into your chest and began squeezing your heart until it ruptured. An odd feeling, I will admit, to know that there's nothing to be afraid of, and yet to find yourself inexplicably humming some recently remembered tune, a theme song to a children's program you used to watch as a child, just in a misguided action to calm the nerves and set the soul at ease. Having been lost in these thoughts, I abruptly stopped what tragic noise was passing itself off as humming, when I came to the realization that I traversed the full length of the tunnel without even noticing. Not a complaint, mind you. Far from it. Anything to get this over and done with. Dancing playfully with the shadows, the beam of my flashlight passed back and forth, gracefully at first, like a skilled dancer moving with sublime grace. The torch illuminated an allotment of large, dented, decayed metal cages, thick grime-encrusted cables, the colours of which had long since faded away, erupted from the huge lockers inside. Like the gangly legs of a giant, rusting metal arachnid, they ran up the walls and splayed out in both directions. Some running up into the cracked ceiling, disappearing from sight, others drooping under their own bloated weight, running away back up the tunnel and vanishing from sight through holes punched into the walls. Tracing the light back and forth along their length, satisfied there were no debilitating damage to them, I turned my attention to the lockers themselves, the cage doors squealing in protest at being swung roughly open, teeth clenching, a sound akin to raggedy fingernails being dragged slowly, deliberately down a dirty chalkboard. Rolling my head around to rid myself of the ghastly sound as if it was trapped inside the bony cage that was my skull, hoping it would shake free and roll out one ear. Finding myself muttering and mumbling to nothing and no one but my own lonesome, as I flicked switches, pressed buttons, and poked and prodded at anything that looked like it might be the cause and reasoning to why I was being subjected to this place. Taking a small shuffle back, I felt an odd puzzled expression wash over my face. Honestly, I was stumped. A feeling I was unfamiliar with in my line of work up to this point in time. A hand hovering over my radio, but stopping short of calling it in. It was more a matter of pride. I had to have overlooked something, but as far as my eyes could make out, there was nothing wrong. No visible indication as to what was causing the fluctuations and outages. Something was clearly siphoning power. But what? And where was it going? Like a weather-beaten statue, I remained motionless for what seemed like a lifetime. My final assessment was to simply shake my head and repeat the inspection again, deciding that I must have overlooked something. Steadying my already shaky resolve, I began to repeat my actions more closely. It was as I was poking and prodding, my attention focused firmly on the task at hand, that I noticed it. A subtle creeping sensation at first, a touch of death rising the hairs on my arms, that eerie silence as quiet as the grave, the calm before the storm, my shallow breath booming out with all the noise of a gale-force wind in the silence surrounding me. It took me aback, as the mild panic crawled its way up my legs, spreading its way across my body and along each trembling limb. There was something else. At first, disbelievingly, I thought I was sobbing. Like a terrified infant, afraid to face the darkness at bedtime. That biting chill of fear, clamping its jaw down tight across my body. The realization came a split second later, a sudden, gut-wrenching flash of dread. It wasn't coming from me. Frantically spinning on heels, hysteria causing my numb hand to swipe the beam of my flashlight through the darkness. Like a finely sharpened blade, I slashed through the encroaching shadows. I became still, frozen, like the perfect representation of a human ice sculpture. Only my legs couldn't quite decide if they were made of ice or jello. fixing my gaze on the passageway ahead, chest heaving. It felt like I couldn't draw in enough air, that some invisible force was slowly coiling itself around me like a gargantuan serpent, constricting ever tighter. Ears pricked, but it was gone. The phantom sobbing. Nothing. Nothing at all. I didn't know what to think. I was so certain. Certain I hadn't imagined it. Dead certain. And yet, nothing. How long did I stand there for? Who knows? I honestly can't recall, with my shoulders finally slumping, having felt like the Titan Atlas holding up the celestial spheres, the weight of my own fear rolling off as a deep sigh passed through my lips. It won't let me leave. Tears began to well up. There was little I could do to dam them, cascading down pale cheeks, every joint, every muscle locked up as if pins had been jammed in, inserted between my very bones. Like a statue frozen in time, I wished more than anything to be somewhere else, anywhere else. I heard it. There was no mistaking it, and no denying it. No tricks of the acoustics, no tricks of the mind. It was no trick at all. The voice, a low whisper, had come from behind me. But I knew. At the same time, it was impossible, for the only thing there was the decaying mess of circuit breakers, just the rusting cages that housed them, just the serpentine pipes that snaked away from them across the tunnel walls, escaping out of sight. Creaking neck muscles groaned in protest as I forced myself to look. I didn't want to. I was so afraid. No, I was beyond that. I should have run. Looking back now, I know I should have. But fear works against the mind. Some people do indeed flee, their bowels emptying down their leg as they do. But me, it worked differently. Against all sane and rational judgment, the fear rooted me to the spot, freezing all but the most basic of motor functions. Carefully, though. Oh, so very carefully. As if time was slowing my whole body, drawing out each agonizing second, like skipping frame by frame on an old VHS tape, ensuring the perfect freeze frame on what you were hoping to get a good gander at. I rotated on the spot, to finally face whatever it was that was there, lurking in the blackness behind me. In a quick draw motion as if my life depended on it, and with a speed I hadn't realized I was capable of, not too dissimilar to an old West gunslinger, my torch whipped up from my side, straight out, shooting its bright beam and blasting light into the shadows before me. Scattering, the dark shapes fled as if fearing being hit, but all in vain. Nothing. Not a damn thing. It was at this point sanity finally took hold and enough was enough. The job was done, or at least that's what I'd tell them. I could make up any lie I needed once I was out of here. The soft putty my legs were becoming hardened. Like a coiled up spring, my resolve sprung back into action as I took a step backwards. Without warning, the sound of a wailing banshee erupted by my side, startling my already fragile nerves. My radio screamed to life. Hissing and wailing, the ear-piercing shriek tore at my ears, the high pitch threatening to liquefy my tender brain. In the struggle to wrestle myself free from the device, my hands fumbled, the adrenaline causing my already panic-stricken fingers to yank the radio from me. Failing to properly grasp it, like a cracked egg, it split open upon a chorus of my own cursing as it struck the ground, making one last pitiful whine before dying in a crumpled heap. I had barely enough time to register the stupidity of my own actions when, in between the deep, ragged breaths of my own breathing, I heard it. Click. My eyes flicked up. I knew that sound. The audible, dull, echoing thud in the gloom. The familiar noise of a fuse switch tripping off. A clear indication too much power was being drawn through the line. But no sign as to the cause. Click. Another dull thud in the gloom as the second fuse tripped. Then another, and another, and another still. Switches and warning lights, dials and warning sounds, everything went berserk. Like a panicking deer caught in headlights, all I could do was stare, dumbstruck at what I was witnessing. Akin to the flow of pressurized water surging through over-constricted pipes, blasting off rivets and bursting through the holes. Peering forwards, I struggled to even comprehend it all. Then it ceased, leaving only my strained breathing as the only sound. It won't let me leave! Terror, fear, horror, panic, gut-punching sickness. Too many emotions, too many uncontrollable feelings all at once. Unbearable. Struggling to take in a breath, toppling backwards and crashing to the cold, hard ground. Not giving a care to the sudden jolt of pain that arced up the length of my arms. My eyes, fixed eyelids, unblinking at the grotesque thing suspended in front of me. How do you explain what your brain can't comprehend? What it won't comprehend? Transparent, almost like a reflection in a dirt-stained window, flickering like a grainy, distorted video image in the form of a ravaged puppet on slack strings. The apparition hung over my prone form, wailing and sobbing, its lower half disappearing back between the grime-encrusted cables and into the stone brick wall its terrible visage had sprung from. Sickening, strangling sounds followed by a bubbling gurgle escaped its lips. A face and body, like a piece of pulverized raw meat, as if vigorously tenderized by a butcher's hammer, dangled as if being restrained, a sick perversion of a cruel master tugging roughly at their canine's leash. Straining to see with tear-soaked eyes, through the blur of my own vision I thought I could pick out the contours of a female figure. She reached out. I imagined a pleading expression reflecting in her eyes. I say this because she had none. Deep, raw, ravaged holes lay in their place, as if thick thumbs had been plunged into the sockets, boring out the eyeballs, leaving nothing but deep, wet pits in the skull. Her face, a visage of pure anguish, appeared as if it was about to utter something more, though at this point it would have been nothing more than a guess on my part. One last cry of pure undiluted pain, one last plea begging for help. I can't say. For there came a sickening twist of her neck, a violent rotation of the head as if a bottle cap being violently unscrewed. Her entire form was wrenched backwards by invisible strings, yanked by an unseen presence with such force that the apparition had no time to even utter a recognizable sound as it vanished back into the dingy gloom it had come from. Microshakes rattled through my body, frozen to the spot and fighting the fear that refused to subside. It took all the willpower I could muster to even release the pent-up air I'd been holding in. Feeling the burning in my lungs, I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath in all this time. Get up! Run now! Were the only thoughts crossing my fractured little mind. My grip tightened around the handle of my flashlight, my fingers feeling like they might break against the pressure. It was like a weapon, the only thing protecting me from this insanity. Spinning on the spot, slicing the darkness with the beam, my growing newfound determination granting me the ability to at least manage a crawl. Undignified as it might be, but like a wounded animal trying to escape a predator, I too would do whatever I had to get away. Edward? Why didn't you save me? A crackling voice emanating from the crumpled form of my radio, mere feet from me, forced my eyes to widen in despair. I had known that voice, but one that I had not heard in a long time, but had yearned so much to hear once more. Annie? A whimpered voice escaping my lips, the fear draining from me as I gathered up the shattered remains of my radio, cradling it in my arms, sadness and heartbreak filling my heart. Why didn't you save me? Did you hate me that much? Crackled the dismembered voice again. No, I tried. I miss you so much. So much emotion welling up at the sound of her voice, and so much I wanted to say, to tell her I can't move on, not without her with me. That the void in my heart couldn't be replaced by anyone else. But all I could utter to my departed wife were 3 words. I love you. It should have been you! The scream came, and not from the radio, but all around as if the very tunnels themselves were alive, forcing my hands to my ears. The utter venom laced into the scream. It stung my very soul as if attacked by a dozen striking cobras. How could I ever have loved someone as pathetic as you? It was now an audible hiss coming directly from behind me, a sound of mocking scorn wrapped up in the voice of the woman I still loved. Truth is, I never loved you. I started that fire. Shut up! Wailing back as my voice began to break, forcing my palms against my temples to block out the voice, the pressure from my own hands threatening to crush my own skull like a ripe melon. I started it to get away from you. The assailant of burnt meat began to waft in front of my nostrils, the feeling of movement, her presence moving in close. The pungent odor of death followed, rolling in thickly like a heavy mist. It coiled in around my body. It was powerful, and I could feel the rising bile in my throat. The form of a distorted face glided into my peripheral vision, but I dared not look back at it directly, even as I slammed my eyes shut, scrunching them up tightly. I made out the blurring form of charred flesh, peeled back from the bone, missing features as if melted away under intense heat like the melting of hot plastic dripping down itself. This wasn't her! This wasn't her! I repeated over and over in my mind, hoping the words would offer some form of protection. But I soon came to the realization that even my own thoughts were betraying me. It is me, you pathetic fuck! It roared out, feeling hot, malty breath wash over my face, the kind only terrible dental hygiene could produce. Like a rolling tide surfing the waves, a faint chanting could be heard. No, not chanting. Singing. The rhyme of a chorus of children echoed softly. It was too faint to completely make out. Disembodied voices repeating over and over, their singing almost hypnotic. I could make out words such as roses and ashes, but not much else. "It's coming," uttered the disgusting vision of the thing wearing my dead wife's form. "I'll give you a 10-second head start." A distorted, cackling sound erupted. Not from her lips, but I could hear it booming out all around, the words surrounding me like carrion circling a half-eaten carcass. There was no baseless threat, no act of intimidation. I could feel it down to my very bones. My life was now in imminent danger. 5 seconds. My fight-or-flight reflexes finally kicked in, and they chose to flee. Taking off without even a backwards glance, my legs carried my gibbering form a lot faster than I ever thought possible. The adrenaline dump my body was going through was taking utter control. I felt like I could outrun death itself. But why was my mind telling me that it wouldn't be fast enough? "Here I come," the devilish voice boomed. I couldn't tell how close it was. All I knew was I had this spine-tingling dread that something was on my back, closing in fast. Making it to the circular steps, my arms hauled my body up, using the railing for support and skipping multiple steps at once, scrambling on all fours as I reached the top. Like a marathon sprinter at the start of a race, I pushed off the ground with blinding speed, still not daring a glance over my shoulder. For this race I knew there would be no second place. Lungs burning, head dizzy, my world seemed to spin as I tore down the tunnel, dust kicking at my heels. I could make out the exit way, light bathing the entrance in a hazy bright halo like the objective marker to some twisted video game. It was close, but not close enough. I could hear movement behind me, to the sides, and above me all at once. A primal roar erupted, filling my ears. I almost stumbled at the sound, shaking my head free of the noise. I was almost there. Almost. With the animalistic intent of an attacking predator, something clawed at the back of my exposed neck, feeling the sudden wisp of air as the strike sailed millimeters wide of its target, reaching the threshold of my escape and propelling myself forward through the entrance of the maintenance door and out into the real world. Landing in a crumpled heap on the ground with no voice left to scream out, I instinctively rolled onto my back. In a quick-like motion and recoiling like a snake, the heel of my boot struck out, ramming squarely into the old rusting door. As it slammed shut, my eyes gazed up into the deathly darkness, hearing the ghostly, devilish sounds, ones that I will never be able to forget. Of my pursuer, there was nothing. There's little more to be said, and nothing else to be added. There's only so many times I can tell the same story. So you have but two options. Either believe me, or commit me. Either way, the damage is done. I fear we've already lost. For what's down there, I can't say. I saw things that never should have been witnessed with living eyes. But it's what I heard as the door slammed shut. The unforgettable sounds that still haunt my dreams. And the sounds reverberating through the air of phantom children singing from the shadows of the dying light. Ashes to ashes, we all fall down.